Tell us a little about your veterinary pathology career.
So it's a little bit different now from where I started, right? So for the majority of veterinary pathology, you start the career with a very diagnostic focus, right? So we're trained and learned to do diagnosis, pathologic diagnosis in a variety of species. And a lot of pathologists, after they get trained in that area, they start their career as diagnosticians. But there's a subset of pathologists that basically go into a more research-based, investigative-based workflow, and we end up doing like PhDs and start getting into research. So for my work now, this is a key piece because as a veterinary pathologist that does diagnostics, you are dealing with hospital workload, so veterinary hospital workload, or depending on which area you do, you're either working in diagnostic labs for infectious diseases, or you're working in diagnostic labs for companion animals or farm animals and so on, or you're working in large veterinary hospitals that have their own pathology departments. But for the research area, you can work then it's usually related to universities, so it's teaching and research for the most part, or you end up doing more basic research, and in my case, it's cancer research. So for me, as a veterinary pathologist, I do the more investigative piece of it instead of the diagnostics.
Your route to the lab was uncommon. How did it come about?
For me, it was I fell in love with pathology quite by accident. When I was in veterinary school, my initial idea was to become a wildlife veterinarian, and I already wanted to do research, and you will see that it's a very common thread among veterinary pathologists, and I would say that among MD pathologists as well. I know a number of MD pathologists that have the same route, where if you're really interested in the research part of the job and not the diagnostic or the hospital work, it's easier to get into pathology because there's a huge amount of different research that you can do in that background. So for me, it was I was already interested in research to start my career, even as I started veterinary school. So I signed up to be a veterinary student research assistant in a research lab in the pathology department. And the reason why I was in the pathology department is that I wanted to do wildlife research at the time, and the only department that was doing anything wildlife related was the pathology department. So I started working there for the wildlife piece of it, and got in touch with a microscope and slides and started exploring and fell in love with what I saw. So that's why I decided, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to focus in pathology because it opened a whole new world for me.
What makes veterinary pathology so unique?
I think the variety of the work, because in both of the diagnostic or the research / biotech piece, you have a lot of variety in the work, which is very different, for instance, than human pathology. A lot of the times, human pathologists, they really, MD pathologists, they really are specialized in a certain area. So you do a genitourinary or breast or, GI. So there's usually very specialized routes that you follow. I think one unique thing about veterinary pathology is that it's a very broad area. You learn not only every single organ system, but also a lot of different species. So you truly have a comparative view of pathology and how disease evolves in an organism through multiple species, from lab animals to dogs and cats to horses to wildlife species and exotic species and to humans, and at the end the diseases are very similar, but having the possibility to do a wide range of research and also diagnostics is truly unique to veterinary pathology in my view.
How did you find your way into biotech?
That was also, I think, serendipitous. My idea when I got into pathology was to stay with research, which was my passion from the very beginning. But my idea was to stay in academic in academic circles. And I started my career working at the tri-institutional institutes in New York for Memorial Sloan Kettering and Weill Cornell Medical School, Rockefeller University. And in that setting, you're doing research with different groups that are in these hospitals or in these research institutions. And I thought I might stay there, but initially in my research career, when I did my PhD was partially funded. I got a grant. One of the grants I got for my PhD was partially funded by Genentech, which is a very well-known biotech. And they had this program at the time that funded certain students, certain pathology trainees and PhD students in the area, spread throughout many universities. At that time was UC Davis in my case, and Genentech is in San Francisco. So I got funded by a grant partially provided by them. And so they invited me to give a talk about my research at Genentech. So I went and I presented my research, as a form of, hey, let's see what you did with your grant and how did that turn out. So after I presented my research to them, there was a really good reception from the pathologists at the Genentech, and from then on, there was a network effect, and I kept getting emails from them saying, hey, were you ready to come work with us? I think you would really like working here. And I kept saying no for a while, but after a few years, maybe 5-6 years, I said, well, why don't I just give this a try? That might be really interesting. They're very academic, and so that's how I started my biotech career.
What's your favorite part of your work?
I really love the fact that I get to do so many different things. So my entire career has been really focused on cancer research and cancer drug development. So in academia was cancer research and some other more basic science researches, but mostly cancer. And same thing in industry. But what I really like about it is that in the drug development area where I am right now or have been for quite a long time, is the variety of areas that you can actually make an impact. So I love the fact that I can wake up in the morning and think, what I'm doing here has a direct impact in the lives of people. I'm very motivated in this area because I lost both my mother and my father to cancer fairly early, and there's so much cancer in my family and even my own personal experience with it. So I feel like the impact, just having the sense that you can have a direct impact and to contribute to help lives of patients, to help extend life and to help quality of life and all of those things. That's my favorite piece of what I do right now is having that purpose. And that to me is very important. And another thing that I really enjoy is the variety in what we do. So I can work from the very beginning of an investigation for a drug where we're just thinking about the concepts, the biology, the molecules, the mechanism of action of certain drugs, through the safety piece where you're trying to investigate, how safe is this molecule going to be in a patient, to the clinical piece where we're designing biomarker strategies for clinical trials or working with diagnostic tests for patients. So I do all of that, and also a very interesting element of machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is really the future of pathology. And we do a lot of that. We're highly involved in workflows to get machine learning and deep learning in pathology research and diagnostics. So those things are my favorite things, the variety, the purpose behind what I do, and also the variety of areas that I can contribute to in my daily job.
What one key thing would you like to share about what you do?
I think really what people don't know is that I feel that pathologists in biotech, whether we are veterinary pathologists or MD pathologists, and in my case, veterinary pathologists mostly join industry to work with toxicology and laboratory animal species, right? So for the toxicology piece of drug development. What I would like people to know, aspiring professionals in this area, is that there's a lot more that can be done that's not just related to toxicology, right? There's investigative pieces where you work with really basic questions of biology. There are clinical questions where you're working with questions like, okay, how do we stratify patients in a clinical trial, or what are the biomarkers we're looking for to understand drug response? So I think the key thing that I would like to pass on is that there's a lot of different fields that open up from this area. It's not a narrow path. There's a lot of things you can do in this area, and that's the main key thing. And I think just ancillary to that is that if you kind of think about all the things we discussed, is it all comes from the same thread, which is loving research and having a purpose and following that, right? So I think the other key piece is, as long as you're doing something that you're really interested in, that you can really get engaged, then from there opportunities will open up in the career, and I think there's a place for everybody.